So far we learned how to create these classes objects using stereotypes, and when I have the classes with the dependencies, I know how to inject them as well. Yeah. Instead of doing manual dependency injection of DAO into services into controllers, when we use at the rate auto wired, automatically that objects will be injected. Whichever objects are automatically created when you use stereotypes, that objects automatically getting injected when you used auto wired. Auto wired will enable to inject any object which is available in IOC. So basically, when you follow XML approach for object creation and using at the rate auto-wired annotation doesn't make any sense. Of course, you can create objects in XML file and you can use auto-wired for dependency injection. But why still we should create objects in XML file? We have stereotypes. You can create objects by using stereotypes. You can create objects by using stereotypes. Still, if you want to create any object in XML, if you want to avoid stereotype, you can avoid it. Let's say you don't want to create this repository by using at the rate repository annotation. I want to configure it in XML only. You can put it. Both will work in a similar way. Though with stereotype, how it is creating object, the same way it will create object by using bean tag also. So it is advanced approach. When you use stereotyped annotations, you need not to visit your XML file and do the configurations, and you need not to do manual dependency injections. Instead, you can go with at the rate auto wired. Okay, excuse me. And during stereotype discussion, I was telling there is a important stereotype annotation which is at the rate configuration. Which is at the rate configuration. We'll talk about it. At the rate configuration annotation. Basically, this at the rate configuration annotation also a bean level annotation, something like your controller at the rate service at the rate repository. But special it has some speciality that this configuration class we use, this configuration class we use, whichever beans, right, apart from your application classes. Let's say during implementation of your use case for your view, you have controller and you created controllers with the rate controller, and you have service, you created service with the rate service, and if you want to inject service, you can easily inject this by using stereotype annotation. Objects you can inject by using at the rate auto void. Whichever object is created, that you can easily inject by using at the rate auto void. So automatically that object will be getting injected here. And if you have a DO class, you will be using at the rate repository. You can inject it here. So when user submits his request from view, easily you can able to establish communication. View to controller, controller is already auto wired with service. You can able to call service. Service can able to call a DAO. So finally DAO can interact with database. So consider in this use case, I'm not using any XML file. I'm not using any XML file, creating my controller with stereotype, service with stereotype, repository also with the stereotype annotation I'm creating. Here if I need a connection pool object, I want to create a connection pool object, which is data source. Okay. And still you can use XML file if you want. Here you can create connection pool object bean id connection pool object class, some connection pool class like data source. So your connection pool object will be created here, and you can inject this connection pool. Here you can auto void connection pool object. Here you can auto void your connection pool object here, whichever you created in XML file. Few objects still if you want to create in XML file, you can create them, and you can auto wire that object as well. Which all we can auto wire? XML beans also can be auto wired. So using stereotype also, your container will be creating these objects. They can auto wired, and this XML bean also can be auto wired. Finally, all these beans with the stereotype or with XML, whatever beans you have created, that four beans will be available to IOC. Whenever you load and create them, right, IOC will hold all the objects. It will have your controller object. It will have your controller object reference with it, and service object. Finally, all will be available to your container repository object, and whichever connection pool object you have created, data source object. Once objects are ready here in the IOC context, once all these objects are ready, they are all ready for auto wiring. All will be created into IOC only. Finally, all your objects created in IOC, so all these objects are ready for auto wiring. So as soon as they created here, they are ready for auto wiring. So though it is coming from XML file or via stereotype you created, it will be available here. Okay. So your data source object will be created in IOC, repository will be created, service will be created, controller also will be created. So wherever you want to auto wire them, you can auto wire. When you use auto wire, right, what it will do? It will check whether that suitable class is available in the context or not. When a controller is auto-wired with a service class, let's say here you have car class, and car class is having engine dependency. When car is auto-wired with engine, basically what it will do, IOC will verify for the engine object whether there is any engine object is available or not. So if engine object is available, then immediately it will inject it. Same way, consider service is like a engine, and this engine is having fuel dependency. And when it try to search for the fuel for the engine, if fuel object is available, automatically it will inject. Which means data source object is dependency for my DAO. If data source is available, automatically it will be injected. If not available, nothing will be injected. If available, then only it will inject. Then this so and so repository class is a dependency in my service class. When you mention auto void, automatically that will inject it because that object is available here. When your service class is dependency into your controller, so and so service class will be injected into your controller automatically. So automatically this dependency injection will be happened with the auto void, whether your object is created in XML file or via stereotype. It doesn't matter. It will be auto void automatically. Now, why I went to XML based configuration to create this? As I have stereotype for my classes, whichever MVC classes I am creating. Generally, MVC classes, what you will implement? A controller, a service, and a repository. Apart from this, a service or a repository or a controller, what else I can have in MVC layer? Maybe a utility class, a simple utility class or validations, whichever validations I want to execute for controller. Let's say I'm getting some data. name or email, mobile number, kind of data I'm getting. So I want to validate that fields. I want to validate that fields. So for my controller, once after reading the data here, email and mobile number, I want to validate. So to validate, I want a validation class, a validation util class I want. So maybe you can put all the validations here in a validate method. You can create a validate method and you can put validations there. And when you have such utility classes, you can use at the rate component, and this object also will be created. In case if you want to auto wire this object, you can auto wire comfortably this object also into controller and you can utilize it. Okay, so apart from controller service repository, few utility classes also you can have. In case if you have any configurations like creating data source or creating REST templates, if you want to do any configurations, there is no specific object you can create because they all are predefined classes. Data source is a predefined class. For connection pool, basically we use data source, or there are some third party classes like combo pool data source, or Apache basic data source. All are predefined classes. Predefined library classes are available. Hikari data source. So there are so many data source classes are available from third parties to create connection pools. Okay, we'll discuss about connection pools later. But consider they all are third party classes which are available from basically third party jar files. Apache DBCP is providing this jar is providing this combo pool basic data source. Apache basic data source is provided in here in this jar file. This is not belongs to Spring. This is belongs to Apache. In Apache library you can find it. Similar way, Hikari data source, it is available with the Spring only. And combo pool data source, you need to use C3P0 data source library, third party library jar file we will use to create this connection pool object. So these all are third party classes. So as these classes are already implemented by third parties and given to us, they used some core Java techniques and implemented. They didn't use any Spring API there. So maybe using some core techniques, core Java logic, they implemented them. They implemented such classes and given to us using simple core Java. So these all are predefined classes from third party libraries. These all are predefined classes from third party libraries. So that classes I want to use in my application. That classes I want to use in my application to create connection pools. Okay, connection pool is nothing but creating n number of connections at a time as a pool. Okay, we will discuss it later, but just assume that. So instead you creating a connection every time, what we will do, we will bring multiple connections from database at a time into pool, and we will use connections from the pool. Instead of connecting every time with the database, we get connections from connection pool. So such connection pool I need to create here, such connection pool I need to create here, and this connection pool I can auto wire. So from data source, from database, connections will be created, multiple connections into a pool. One pool will be created. That pool I am creating here using XML file configuration. And wherever you want to auto-wire, you can auto-wire that pool. So repositories will be really required. Connection pools into repositories you can inject. So when there is a name, email, address, data coming from the UI, this data we will submit to controller. Controller will read the data and we send it to service. Service will send it to repository. Here your repository will use this connection pool, one single connection. From here it will bring one connection. It will reserve one connection and it will connect with your database. And once after doing CRUD operation, again it will place back that connection into connection pool without closing it. Okay. So faster database operations are possible with connection pool here. So to create such connection pool, libraries not belongs to Spring. Libraries are from third parties, and to create that objects I need XML file so that I can able to create their bean also here. Even though if it is third party class also, you can configure it here using bean class, and you can put their third party class fully qualified path com.dbcp.apache basic data source with some setter methods also they given. So you can call that setter methods. Did they given setter methods for Spring purpose? No. Basically they have setter methods. In any API, anybody want to call setters using core Java approach also they can call them. So as setters are available, we will use setter methods here to create connection pool. Okay, everything looks fine. But in case if you want to avoid complete XML file, I don't want to even create the third party classes here. So is there any suitable configuration is available if I want to avoid this bean creation of third party classes here? Without XML, I want to create that object of third party library. Is there any place that is equivalent to this XML based configuration with the annotations? Yes. So you can do same thing by creating something app configuration class. A configuration class you can create. A configuration class you can create with the configuration annotation. Configuration annotation. Configuration annotation. You can create a class and you can assume this class is like your XML file. This is equivalent to your XML based configuration. Equivalent to your XML based configurations. So whichever object you can't put by using controller service. Controller is your own controller for this form. Service is your own service for this particular use case. Repository your own bean, whichever you are creating for CRUD operations. There will be some third party classes objects already available that you need to create. So in such case, you can't go to that third party library already which they implemented and you can't put this annotation on top of their classes, right? You can't put your controller annotation. Can you put on top of basic data source class which is already implemented and given to us? No. The classes are already implemented and given to us. I can't go and interrupt that classes. I can't go and put controller or service repository or component on their library classes. I can't edit them. I can't make changes into that classes. As it is, I need to use that classes. But I need object of that class. I need object of that class want to register into IOC. How you can register? If stereotype is not allowed on top of this class, you may need to go with XML file. Under XML file, you need to configure this class, third party class, so that this XML bean also will be created into IOC, so that that is eligible for auto wiring. In case if you want to avoid that XML based configuration for third party library also, instead you doing bean creation here, is there any way for third party objects? Means you can use configuration. How I can create there? Instead of bean tag, they given bean annotation for you. Bean annotation for you. You can use bean annotation. This is equivalent to your bean tag. Whichever bean tag you are using here, this is equivalent to this bean. This is equivalent to this bean. Bean annotation is equivalent to this bean, and this XML file is equivalent to this configuration. Okay, configuration we use as an alternate for this XML bean configurations. For XML bean configurations, we will use configuration. For simple bean tag alternative, we use bean. And what about this object creation? You can create it manually. Public, whichever object finally you want to deliver, that object data type you need to put here. Let's say basic data source you want to return, BDS. Basic data source, you can use any method name. Whatever object you want to create, strictly you need to put that object reference here with some method, create BDS something. And here you can use simple core Java logic to create your object. Simple core Java logic you can use to create your object. So basic data source be equal to new basic data source. So this is the alternative for your XML file. In XML file, when you do this bean configuration, IOC used to load this class using class.forName and .new instance. It used to create object. Now you need not to do that. You can create object by using directly new keyword. You may ask now here why you are using new keyword. Earlier you said don't use new keyword. Yes, don't use new keyword anywhere else except at the rate bean. Inside at the rate bean, when you use it, no problem. It will not create multiple objects. When you create this basic data source and return this, so which is equivalent to how your IOC is creating singleton object here, right? When you configure this class, usually what it will do, when you configure this class using class dot for name, it will load that class dot for name dot new instance it will create just by loading your class here. At runtime only your object will be created just by loading this class here. Internally IOC will do that. Internally IOC will do that. So it will use this approach to create your object. Instead, what you can do, you can directly create object and return it. But basically, this will happen only one time. When you use XML based configuration and load it, one time, one object only will create it. Only during container startup, one object will be created. Only one object, only one object will be created, which is singleton. So what about this? How many times this bean will be executed and how many times this object will be created means when you use at the rate bean, when you use at the rate bean inside configuration class when you use at the rate bean, what it will do while scanning this package, right? IOC container will scan like other controller service repositories. Your IOC will scan configuration also. IOC will scan configuration also. It will create your configuration class object, app config object. Your app config object will be created. Under app config, if you use any at the rate beans, if you use any at the rate beans, it will consider okay. It will consider them like okay. So developer is trying to provide alternate for XML bean. Let me create that object. So IOC will create at the rate bean object also. Which bean object it need to create? Which bean you are returning here? Whichever bean you are returning here, that bean object it will create into IOC. So which object final I want to return? BDS, basic data source. So basic data source object it will be keep it into IOC reference. But who is creating it actually? Developer only. Developer only by the new keyword he is creating. So whatever object developer is creating here, right? The same object we are returning. So this object will be registered into IOC. And how many times this object will be created? How many times this at the rate bean will be executed? This at the rate bean will be executed only one time. As soon as it scan your package, as soon as it scan your configuration package, it will create one configuration object. Under configuration, if it find any at the rate bean, it will go and execute this method code, and finally whichever object is returned, right, this returned object it will keep it as a reference key and it will not execute. If somebody try to call it manually also, if someone try to call this method again and again 100 times also, it will not go inside method and it will create new object only one time. While scanning this package, this object will be created, and inside this class if it find any at the rate bean, that object also will be created only one time during execution time only. Later if you intentionally try to call this method also, it will not go inside and execute because this method is annotated with at the rate bean. So only one time this method should be executed and this object will be created, and this object will be registered into your IOC context. So again, finally what is happening with XML file, however it is creating with XML file, how it is created in inside IOC with at the rate bean also it will create in a same way. So end of the day, your data source object is available along with all your other stereotyped classes like controller, service, DAO. Now you can auto wire this anywhere. So this is pure alternate for XML bean. So when you have a XML bean that you can't avoid creating in XML, okay, you can bring that bean here into at the rate bean, and whichever object you want to return, put it as a return type here and create that object manually within your method and return it. So finally, at the rate bean with with returned value whichever you created, right? This method will be executed only one time after scanning this package, right? IOC container will call this create BDS method. Internally, this code as you return, right, will execute. Finally, it will return the same BDS object. That object will be registered into IOC. The mandatory thing is you need to return a object, whichever object you want to return. You need to return a object whichever you want to register into IOC. In other words, whichever you want to auto-wire within your repository class or service class or controller class, whichever object you want to auto-wire, you create that object here and return it. This return type is mandatory. Okay, and whichever return type is mandatory you mentioned here, that object you should create and you should return it. Use any style to create your object. You want to use class.forName or new keyword or any other approach, that's up to you. You can use it. And you want to use serialization and deserialization also, you can use it. So whatever you do, you need to create an object, finally return it. And this method name is not mandatory. Put any method name here, but a method is required. End of the day, a method is required with empty inputs. Just create a method and return whichever object you created, that object will be registered. So can I use at the rate bean instead of using configuration class? I have other stereotypes, right? Component I have, controller I have, stereotype I have, service I have, repository I have. Can I put this at the rate bean in other stereotyped classes? Means no. These two are having some relationship, a real bond we have between, a strict bond we have between these two classes. When you use at the rate component, sorry, when you use at the rate configuration with at the rate bean, then only it will behave like your XML based configuration and it will create single object. With configuration with the bean only, it will create single object. In case if you place this at the rate bean inside component stereotype classes or inside controller or service or repository, the behavior will change. If somebody try to call this method intentionally, if somebody try to call IOC, anyway it will call, even if you use it inside configuration class or controller class or service or repository or any class, any stereotype you can use here, and you can configure your method here. So only one time object will be created. But the problem is with other stereotypes, when you configure this at the rate bean, right, if somebody try to call this method intentionally, this method should be called by IOC only. Instead of IOC, if developer accidentally calls this, it will create one more object. It will go inside the method and it will create one more new object. When if it is not being inside configuration class, if it is not inside configuration class, instead of inside configuration class, if it is there inside component class or controller class or service class, then problem will start. So always remember that at the rate bean should be used inside configuration only. At the rate bean used inside configuration only, not inside component or not inside controller, not inside service or not in repository. We should use at the rate bean in configuration only. Okay, are you guys getting at least the context which I am discussing? You guys able to understand? Yes, good. So this, just assume that this at the rate bean is alternate for your bean. Okay, whatever bean id you used to put, maybe some configuration object, xyz configuration you have, a predefined class. I need to create that object in XML file because that is a predefined. I can't use stereotype. So a predefined XYZ class I need to create. So I want to avoid this bean tag. So you can do by using at the rate bean, and you can create a method public. Whatever predefined XYZ class you have, put it as a return type and any method name. You can put any method name and whatever object you want to create. Now create it manually here. Right create a predefined XYZ object here with any approach and return it. Finally, you need to return object here. You do whatever you want to do. Finally, you need to return that object. So that return type only you need to put here mandate. So this is similar to this bin tag only. Okay. In which case we go with this at the rate bin means if your class is not your class, if your class is a predefined class, a configuration class that you need within your application. If it is your class, you know which annotation you need to use. If it is your utility, you will go with component. If it is your controller, you will go with at the rate controller. If it is your service, you will go with service. If it is your repository, you will go with repository. But if a class is from third party, I can't put that stereotypes. So I need to put such class inside at the rate configuration class using at the rate p. You need to write at the rate configuration class. At the rate configuration class is alternate to your XML. Under that class using at the rate bean, you need to create that object. So it will be registered into IOC context and you can auto-ware wherever you want. Okay. So we will see this example tomorrow. I'll give one end-to-end example by creating connection pool. Okay. So you will get actual context of it. Tomorrow I'll give you example. Okay. This concept is very important. Okay. So I'll show you with configuration how this behavior it will behave, and without configuration what kind of behavior it will shows. Okay, we will see that tomorrow. Okay, yeah. So I have another session I need to jump in. Okay, tomorrow we will discuss once again and we will do example. Okay, yeah. Any questions? Yeah, if it is first time hearing this topic, it will be like little bit tricky, but it's okay. Okay, you will be getting it. Once after example, you will realize why I am using this configuration with at the rate B. Okay, concept wise, it is very important. Okay, yeah. Shalom then. We'll see you tomorrow.